We are official, and I think, as everybody knows, we're going to be talking about Kurt Vonnegut's stories, and I'm going to let Karen, who everybody knows so well, but maybe not in this role, talk to us, introduce her topic. Karen, thank you for doing this session.
Yeah, I could have entitled the class KV on KV, but I don't know how that would sell. But it is Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite authors, and you're probably familiar with some of his biographical information, but I will give you some anyway. He was born in 1922 in Indianapolis, and he died in 2007. So 1922, there's a museum based on him in Indianapolis, and I imagine that next year they probably will be having some kind of centennial celebration of his birth. He was born into a wealthy family, but when the Depression hit, it really hit his family, and his parents apparently were never the same. His father became totally depressed from the Depression. His mother took to alcohol, and in the biographical sketch that I read about him, it said they became totally despairing. And maybe this might account for some of the pessimism that pervades some of his work. Although I think the Slaughterhouse-Five story might also be a major contribution to the way he felt about life. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge in 1945, and he was imprisoned in Dresden. Fortunately for him, he was imprisoned underground in a freezer in a slaughterhouse when the firestorm hit Dresden. And I was not really aware of how the magnitude of that. Over 60,000 civilians died in the firestorm. Kurt was let out of the slaughterhouse, and he had a job, which sounds absolutely horrible. His job was to gather and burn the dead that had been annihilated from the firestorm. He attended 4 colleges: Cornell, Carnegie Mellon, and now you know why I'm mentioning all 4 colleges, because that's mine, Tennessee, and Chicago. In 1969, Slaughterhouse-Five became his first major success. And of course, it was anti-war, and it reminds me that I want to reread it. I haven't read it in a long time. And as I was thinking about it, I remember, if those of you who read it, remember the sentence that's used over and over again in the novel, and so it goes. And it was almost a transition sentence. It was used for comic relief, and it was generally used after a death, after Vonnegut mentioned a death. He was quite prolific. He wrote 14 novels, 4 plays, 3 short story collections, much short fiction and nonfiction. And he wrote and was active until he died. His writing is based a lot on what he had read, which was unbelievably eclectic. As a young person, he read pulp fiction, science fiction, fantasy. He also was well read in the classics. He read Aristophanes, and for Sandy Kessler's course coming up on Plato, we will be reading Aristophanes. And Aristophanes used humorous critiques of contemporary society. And I think we see that with Vonnegut in Harrison Bergeron. He read Mark Twain and mirrored Twain's pessimistic outlook on humanity. And his favorite writer was George Orwell. And as you were reading Harrison Bergeron, you might have had thoughts of 1984, and we'll talk about that when we do talk about the story. His tone of his writing, and we'll talk about that in more detail, was conversational. Both of the stories have a lot of dialogue in them. You also see that he was a vocal critic of American society, not so prevalent in Who Am I this time, but definitely in Harrison Bergeron. We'll talk about Harrison Bergeron, and it dawned on me that I might not be pronouncing his name properly. And I've often used Google for the correct pronunciation of real people and how to pronounce their names. And guess what? Harrison Bergeron is there. And I am pronouncing it correctly. I thought it might be Bergeron, but no, it's a soft G, and it is indeed Harrison Bergeron. The first question that I want to ask you, and I hope you have some responses to it, and I think it's a major question, is what were your emotional responses as you were reading the story? I think that's key. And I'm also curious to know what feelings it might have evoked in you. So I'm looking for volunteers.
Yeah, we put a note in chat. You can write to me there if you'd like to respond. Joanne, go ahead.
I was laughing my ASS off, Karen. Okay. Do you hear me? All right.
Yes.
But of course, Orwell immediately came to mind, and there's nothing funny in 1984. But this is the comic version. He flips it. We've got that black humor. We've got that dark humor. I can't help it, Karen. I was laughing my butt off.
No, I understand that. But even at the end, Joanne, you didn't have a,
yes, the
a
sadness,
different
that's when it all
response?
flips. Yeah, that's when it flips, when she talks about the sadness. And I think they say it twice, don't they? They talk about the sadness twice. But yeah, then I felt the tragedy of it all. But up until that point, I couldn't help it. You know, I just couldn't help it. I was laughing. It's, you know, theater of the absurd.
And of course, Hazel's comments when she asks George about the interruptions that he's getting, and what did that sound like? And then she says, that must be so interesting to have all of those different sounds. And of course, for him, it was excruciating. Okay, let's get back to the beginning. What exactly was and by the way, this is not in the too far distant future. It's 2081. By my math calculations, only 60 years from now. What was it about the society that you think wanted them to make all those changes in the Constitution so that these handicapping devices could be utilized? What was the purpose of it, and why were they there?
Well, I think it was a dictatorship, and they wanted to control everything. Richard, go ahead.
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I think probably the idea, and I thought about this before just in life, and the fact that probably only 5 people today run the whole world. So I don't think it's that much in the future. And the idea that probably, although I don't think this was stated in the story, probably the idea is that the whole operation was being controlled by just a couple of people. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about the character of Hazel. May I ask now?
Sure.
Was she dumbed down for this, or was that really what Hazel was, and they had no reason to stifle her intelligence? Was she just
blah?
Normal? What?
Blah. She was blah. She wasn't.
Yeah.
She wasn't exceptional in any way. So there was no.
And that was her
reason.
natural,
Right.
the way she was. So there was no reason to artificially do anything to her.
Right.
I thought she was at the same time a sad and funny character. You know, some of the things that came out of her mouth I thought were almost entertaining, but the whole thing was so tragic. So anyway.
Let's go to Rosie. Can I unmute, please? And then
Okay,
Betsy.
thank you. Hi, I agree with everybody, and I think the story is mostly very, very sad. It's taking away all your individuality. And at the same time, the premise, it seems at the beginning, was to create an egalitarian society, which is very much in conflict with our concept of egalitarian society. And it becomes dictatorial, of course. And it reminded me of what's that movie where they have different I can't remember the name of it, but where the kids are thrown there from different areas and they're thrown together to fight to defend their
Lord of the Flies.
Flies. Lord
the
of
Lord
the
of the
Flies.
Flies. Right.
They were all
So-
from a British private school. Yes.
Right.
Oh,
So that,
which they
you know,
call
it
public
was
school.
it was really I love both stories. I think that he's fantastic, but I didn't know Kurt Vonnegut Jr. So that was a wonderful opening for me. Thank you.
You should get my suggestion. Both of these were taken from what my favorite collection of his short stories, Welcome to the Monkey House.
Okay.
And I think virtually every story in there has a quirk and or a quirky character, and none of them are very long. And he just is such a wonderful wordsmith, and the situations that he sets up, as you pointed out, Rosie, I think are quite intriguing. And so, Welcome to the Monkey House is my suggestion. And I
Will do.
also suggest reading Slaughterhouse-Five, which is really a marvelous novel.
You got it. I'll do both. Thank you.
Your assignment, Rosie,
Okay.
and write a book report on it. Oh, I'm going back. Never mind.
Okay, we'll see you
Let's go
soon.
to-
We'll see you soon.
Betsy, go ahead.
Well, from the very beginning, and when the son is taken away, it's so sad to see the father wanting to cry and not being able to, or the tears are coming, and the wife it's almost as if she can't remember from 1 second to the next what has actually happened. And I'm sure that the husband loves the wife and takes her for what she is, and accepts that as almost grateful compared to what everyone else has to go through. But I thought that the saddest part of the book, throughout, was the loss of the son and the inability of people being able to show their emotions. It was very tragic. And yet just before the end, there was one bit of light coming through when the sun is flying high.
Well, and you asked about how it made us feel. And for me, I was really shocked at the ending. It's upsetting, it's sad, and it's shocking. Go ahead, Richard. You have to unmute.
Just one question, and I read it twice, and I still couldn't figure out, why was the son taken away to begin with? Is it because he was so spectacular?
Yes, he
Oh,
was
okay.
so exceptional,
Yeah.
both in his physical nature, his mental acuity, everything about him, that he was taken away and given handicaps that were
300 pounds.
more oppressive
yeah.
than anyone else. I want to talk about the scene in the TV studio. We'll call it the ballet. I'd like to hear your comments as that was unfolding. Did you have an idea as he strips himself of his handicaps and takes them off the one beautiful, talented ballerina? Did you have any idea of what was going to happen?
No.
I didn't. Did anybody? Okay, Rosie, you go ahead. Unmute.
Hi, I did think it was going to end badly. I think he was just going to feel that feeling of freedom, but they weren't going to let him have it. No.
Well, was there anything that was gained by Harrison's act of rebellion was anything changed? Was there anything that,
No,
or was it just a
nothing.
completely futile act that didn't have any relevancy afterwards?
Well, it had relevancy for him because he was free now. He was dead. There was nothing left for him to suffer. And he made his statement of rebellion, and that was it. I mean, there was no consequence for the rest of the society. But for him, at least, he's no longer suffering.
Do you think he knew that it was futile?
Probably, yes. Yes, I think he was smart enough to know.
Okay. Betsy, come on in.
Well, I think that at the end, when he suddenly breaks out of his constraints, the television blows up. And for one brief moment, the father doesn't have to hear the repetitive sounds in his ear. So it disrupted the whole country, or whatever size area it covered. But at that one moment when he takes over the station, there was I don't know the time element in it, but for sure, he disrupted the country that for one moment before he took flight.
What do you think was occurring in the country other than, I mean, besides Richard's theory of 5 people running it, but that still doesn't explain it. What do you think was happening in the country 60 years from now that would cause them to initiate these draconian handicap plans to try to make people equal? What could have preceded that?
Let's go to Mesh. Go ahead, Mesh. You have to unmute, please.
Okay. I think it may have been something that occurs even in society today, and that is the desire to make people equal so that some people don't feel jealousy of what others have. One example, for instance, is schools that require students to wear uniforms, because when you allow them to dress the way they want, it does create problems sometimes in schools that some people are wearing designer clothing and other people can't afford that. And I think that in general, that may have been the reason that they added so many amendments to the Constitution, and the reason that they tried to make everybody equal. I'm not saying it's a good thing because it's crushing their emotions, and it's only natural that in every generation, some people have talents in one area and others have talents in another area. It amazes me that in every generation, there's people who can compose music and people who can paint, and they have all these different talents. But this is a society where they want to say, you know what, enough of that, because people become jealous of people who are famous, or people become depressed because they can't afford to keep up with the Joneses. And I think that's what may have happened in that 60-year period that caused them to say, no more, everybody is equal, and we'll make sure of that by stifling their ability to be individuals.
Let's go to Joanne. Come on in.
What year did he write this story, Karen?
He wrote it in 1961.
61. Okay, so the 60s didn't break us open just yet. And what Maisha was just saying, I'll further that with today, the kids, everybody, there's no winner. Everybody gets a medal. Everybody gets the trophy. Everybody's equal. And this is 2021, okay, not 1961. So look how prescient Vonnegut was.
I haven't read 1984 in a long time. I probably since 1984 actually was probably the last time I read it. But for those of you who have read it more recently, would anybody like to expound a bit on the parallels between Harrison Bergeron and 1984? Yes, Barry.
Yeah, Barry, go ahead. Yep.
The original title of 1984 was 1948. So when he wrote it, So he was writing about his moment in history, but projecting it and exaggerating it into the future. And I feel the story by Kurt Vonnegut is about the 1950s from a satirical point of view, the age of conformity, Levittown structures, Levittown structures of the mind. And he is projecting this fantasy of an exaggerated conformity into the future. But it's as much about his moment as 1984 was about Orwell's moment.
I wanted to pick up on that if I may, because I was thinking the same thing. 1961 was, that was when Nixon and Kennedy were running against one another, but it was the end of the Eisenhower era where there was enormous conformity and people didn't speak up. It was a silent generation, and a lot of us grew up in that era. We're pretty young, but we knew to some extent what was going on. And I remember, by the way, having a discussion in a class at college right around that time. And, is conformity a problem? Everybody was agreeing. And I said, it's kind of ironic. We're all sitting around and saying, yes, conformity is a problem. But that was kind of the way things worked back then. So I think it's very much of its time. Yeah.
Yes, and the dress code, which I fervently remember back in the 50s and the 60s, you had to actually look exactly like the person who was sitting next to you in class. There were no deviations allowed whatsoever. And when I was in high school in 1959, I remember it was my senior year, my friends and I were going to do a joke. We were going to have a prank, and we were going to go completely avant-garde by wearing 2 different colored socks to school. That was it. I mean, that was way out. And they all chickened out, but I didn't. I conformed, and I had a red sock and a black sock. And my high school, even though it was a public high school, we were very pretentious. I had to go to the dean of women's office, and I was called out of class. She called my mother. Unfortunately, my mother had gone to the same high school, and Miss Williams was there when my mother was there 23 years earlier. And as I was sitting in the dean of women's office crying, I'm sure, she said to me, now remember, I was wearing 2 different colored socks. She said to me, Karen, I don't understand it. You come from a fine family. How could you do this? And to me, that always typified how conforming and Levittown brained we were back in those days. And my mother had to come to school with either a black sock or a red sock so I could continue going to classes that day. And my mother's fear, and she was also, growing up in this generation and was knowledgeable, that this would be on my permanent record and would prevent me. And she was serious. I mean, this was major, and that this would prevent me from ever getting a job because of this.
The only good thing you can say for it back then is that it was very easy to be a rebel because you would wear a slightly different collar on your blouse and you were making a statement, Ridiculous. Maish, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to add, when Karen, you asked for comparisons between 1984 and the Vonnegut story. If I remember correctly, one of the rules in 1984 was slavery is freedom. Is that correct? Yeah. So that really is what applies, I feel, to the Bergeron story, because basically all the people with all their outside forces keeping them down are slaves. Yet I think the people who enforce this, the rulers, they feel, well, this is freedom, because now by being equals, by being slaves, not being able to develop in any particular special area that you have, by being a slave, you're free. You don't have to worry about somebody else being jealous of you or somebody else being angry with you because you're different from them. Everybody is the same. So that's one way that I think there's a parallel with 1984's slavery as freedom.
Mhm.
I want to talk about the ending. I mean, we've talked about the ending a little, but what do you think Vonnegut is saying with the ending? Or before do you want to answer that, Martha, or do you want to go back to something else?
Unmute yourself, Martha. Go ahead.
Everyone is indeed not equal because you've got the handicapper general and agents of that who are not equal to everyone else. They're above everyone else. And that stood out to me. You know, it was still structurally kind of traditional in a way.
Mhm.
And Karen, you gave a new meaning to the term "sock it to me."
I was thinking that, yeah.
This was free laughing. So
Well, you're a visionary.
yes. Do you think what statement is that the statement you think that Vonnegut is making, Martha? Is that everyone?
I don't know. I noticed it. And to me, it was interesting that everyone was not equal. There was still a control dictator kind of body of people who were in charge, and the rest of us were equal. You know, the rest of the people were quote unquote equal. And I don't have any great commentary on what that meant, but it just stuck out.
Thank you.
Let's go to Betsy and then Joanne. Go ahead, Betsy.
Well, previous to this question about what you think led to this book being written, or 1984 and this book, I think we're in a situation right now where everything is very chaotic, and we're all waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I think that what led to this was a chaotic universe or country or something where nobody could control all the division of people from the left, the right, the center, wherever you want to call it. And so somebody decided, a group of people decided that they had to squelch or squash, whatever you want to call it, this kind of environment and make a completely different environment, that no one could express themselves, that no one could go out and march. And I think we're on a precipice of some kind of weird situation that could happen, just like the January 6th situation in Washington, that we're always, or the news is always indicating that there's a tremor of possible chaos, riots, whatever. And I think that is a reflection of the book that we're reading now.
Let's actually go to Terry, who hasn't spoken yet, and then Joanne. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, in my opinion, Kurt Vonnegut is a depressive with a sense of humor.
Right.
That's what he is. And I always like reading his things and wondered why he didn't commit suicide. He had such a hard life. But maybe he felt by stifling the smart people, we wouldn't be so habitual. I'm not sure.
I missed the beginning of what you said, Terry. That not without what?
He was a depressive, but with a sense of humor.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And I don't think he thought society was that good.
No.
And, no. But at least he had a sense of humor.
Right.
And that's why we read him, in my opinion.
Dark humor, yeah.
Slaughterhouse 5.
Okay, Joanne?
Let me just add one thing, that in a way, that's why he's compared to Mark Twain, who also had a rather negative view of society and a sense of humor. He definitely has a sense of humor. Sorry, go ahead, Joanne.
You don't have a story unless you have dark humor, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know. I think of him in terms of Joseph Heller, that black humor, that 50s, very bright, very, very dark, but very bright humor, very clever. But what I was going to say,
Major, my naming one of his characters,
exactly,
Major.
exactly. I mean, brilliant. That Catch-22 was brilliant. But at any rate, when you were talking about the end, Karen, the fact that the two of them were left with Hazel and George. Hazel, I think Barry pointed it out, somebody pointed it out, is equal. She's just average. There's no control necessary. She's already and equally as dim or as bright as anybody else. But George still has the control in his head. He still has an electronic device at the end of the story to set the tone. So if life's going to go on that way, that some have to be controlled and some don't, what does that say? Okay, and that's how we end the story. Yeah, we haven't equalized everybody because you still need an artificial radio in your head to keep it that way. Okay. And I also thought it was interesting that the inspector, what do they call her? The handicap general.
The
is a woman.
handicapper general.
Handicapper, the HG, right. And it's a woman. That I thought was very telling. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that made a statement on its own. So I'll leave it. I'll throw that tidbit out there.
Another question that you probably anticipate was coming. In our current society, do we issue handicaps? Of course, they're not as dramatic as the ones in Harrison Bergeron, but do we, in essence, handicap people and prevent them from completely fulfilling themselves in some way?
I want to make a comment that sort of obliquely comes with what you're saying, which is I think this story is very much, and this is relevant today, very much about mass media and how much it can control things, present things in a certain way, its influence on people who are vulnerable or susceptible, and that is part of what we're seeing. Rosie, you wanted to comment? Whoops, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, I think we do have, just like Judy says about, there's also social media. Just yesterday there was a thing on the news about how Facebook is really hurting young generation, and so that was very important. But I also think that socioeconomically we are not allowing certain people, like yesterday we heard on the class about education. There's a lot of children that are not able to have an equal opportunity to education, and that's a handicap. That's a huge handicap to being at the same level in general society. So I'm sure there are others, but those are the two that I'm thinking about right now.
Well, and there's also racial inequality and socioeconomic inequality that in essence, people who aren't at the top in the 1% or
Right.
even the top 50% are handicapped in a way, because they are prevented from completely fulfilling themselves. It's nearly as dramatic as having a sledgehammer noise going through your brain every now and then. What I thought was interesting, and I don't think I got it the first time I read it, and it's just a side note, is that all of the signals, all of the people who were advanced got the disruptions at the same time. Remember, he talks about the beautiful ballerina is getting the same shock thing that George was getting. So, do you find the characters sympathetic? Are you can take them? Well, we have only 3 main characters.
Yeah, I feel sorry for all of them, actually. The parents who had these limitations they weren't even aware of, the son who falls in love and then everything falls to pieces. I felt sorry for all of them.
Well, I think I should have picked 3 stories because I'm running out of questions. But
Well, do you want
I'd
to
be
say
happy to
maybe?
hear any
Yeah.
other comments that any of you have on this.
It's, well, just a comment from me and then Mesh, sorry, I didn't see your hand up. It's, to me, it was, when I first read it, I thought, wow, this is a science fiction story. And I don't usually read science fiction. So that's my problem. Shouldn't put things in boxes by genre, but yeah, it is kind of science fiction-y, which is fine.
By the way, it first appeared in a science fiction magazine. Yes.
Aha, okay. Susan, I see your hand up, and if you
Yes,
can, yeah, go
yes.
ahead.
Yes, I tuned in a little late, but it reminds me of the Republicans in Congress who've kind of given up their souls. You know, they became Trumpers, a lot of them, and they lost, they know better, but they've become just like each other. They just go along with whatever, you know, Trump wants them to. And a lot of people in society also. And in a way, the Democrats are the opposite because they're always fighting with each other and arguing, but at least they're thinking. So anyway,
They're
that's my reaction.
they're individuals.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Mesh, go ahead, Mesh.
I was just going to add one thing, Karen, since you're a big Stephen Sondheim fan. When he was writing Assassins, about the various different people who assassinated or attempted to assassinate presidents, Sondheim said that in life, he said, when people fail, there are 2 reactions. Some people say, I failed because I wasn't good enough. And others say, it must have been because it was somebody else's fault that I failed. And I think that in a way, this is another reason for the society and Vonnegut's story being the way it is, that they're trying to control people because they're afraid that if people don't succeed in what their dreams are, that they're going to say the fault is somebody else's. So they're keeping everybody controlled in order not to lash out at somebody else who might make them feel like you're the reason that I failed, instead of saying, no, it was my own personal fault that I couldn't succeed in my dream. So
We're seeing that, obviously, not just with Trump, but also on vaccination. It's like, you know, right-wing people saying how you're insulting people who don't want to get vaccinated. You know, yeah, maybe. Anyway.
Well, there's the whole concept of equality in this story that supposedly this new society, which was handicapping people, would create a society, an egalitarian society. What exactly to you, in your mind, is equality? What would it be? Is that everybody is the same, or that I'm looking for other possible definitions? What is equality?
One possible definition is equal opportunity, access, and not that everybody is the same. Robert, did you want to come on? I see Robert doing stuff.
Well,
There you
I was going to say that the person before Maish, or Moishu, however he pronounces his name,
Mesh.
Mesh.
She was right on, and nobody's mentioned yet the firing of the shotgun at the very end to bring down the 2 people. That also parallels our current political situation. You know, Stephen Miller firing the shotgun, not Trump himself. He wouldn't have had the guts, but it's so resonant today. That's all.
Well, that was the only way that it could be ended. You know, obviously they had stripped themselves of their burdens, and so get out the guns, and then the ballerina and Harrison are both annihilated, and that mini revolution is put down. Did you get the feeling, Robert or anybody else, that this might spur on other revolutions? I keep thinking about the ending and how desolated I felt at the ending, as most of you have indicated, you did also. But is there any sense that this might not be the ending, that there might possibly, that Harrison's rebellion was not completely in vain? I'm looking for hope here, folks.
Okay, well, Rosie has a rosy name, so we'll see if she has a rosy
I'm
attitude.
sorry, I don't have any rosy attitude. No, I don't think so, because they immediately forget what happened. You know, the mother and the father, they don't even remember what just happened. So there is nobody who's going to remember that these two got shot. And there is no, I don't see hope. But anyway, I also think that maybe Kurt Vonnegut wrote this after World War II. And his
1961, right.
right, but his memory of the egalitarian society that Hitler was trying to create in Germany, and annihilating all the controversial people, getting rid of people, might have influenced his story. You know, that it comes from there, maybe. Oops. So that's what I have to say.
Let's go to Judy, and then let's see, Terry, Mish, I think maybe you had your hand up again. Okay, anyway, Judy, go.
I'm just going to agree. I found this a very, very depressing ending and very no hope at the end. I can't help you, Karen, but it was very.
Well, the second story's hopeful.
Oh, second
so,
story's another story, but this one, no way.
Okay, Terry, come on in.
Well, I felt that if you were a kind of an optimist, you would say, well, there's going to be somebody else that tries to get out, and that's going to save society. I mean, Harrison couldn't, but somebody else will. An optimist looks at like that.
Okay, Mish, come on in.
I think that Vonnegut wrote the story simply to tell us to cherish your freedom, or else look at what will happen to the society. And I think that was the message for him, is cherish your freedoms. Don't let other people control you. But to Karen, to answer your other question about, let's see, you asked, now it skipped my mind, I'm sorry. All right, I'll have to think of it.
Skipped mine too, Mage.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. No. Oh, you asked what equality is in our society, what that means. And what I would say is that it's the opportunity for everybody to have the same chance to try something. Some will succeed, others will fail. I don't think equality is saying, well, those that failed will say that you were the same as those who succeeded, but everybody should have the same shot, should have the same chance to succeed at what they wish to.
So equality is, of course, is not sameness, is not that everyone is exactly the same, but what you're saying is that everyone does have a chance and no one has hammers going off in his head or whatever, or weights on his body to prevent him from moving and being graceful. I found the ballerina so sad, you know, and you get the hint about her right in the very beginning, because when when Vonnegut is describing the dance, he said that one of them was so much more heavily burdened than the other, and the mask that she had on her face, he said she must have been quite beautiful because her mask was so utterly and horribly grotesque. And of course we see that, well, we see it. I don't know, the poor audience doesn't really get to see it for very long, but I found her such a poignant character. And also the fact that she and Harrison connected, that he knew that she had to be the one that would be his dance partner. And it's like Romeo and Juliet, kind of, that ending. We can go on to the next story if,
on
unless
one
somebody
second.
wants to say more.
Yeah, Robert, did you want to add anything? You have to unmute if you do. No?
I'm using a different computer. And,
Okay.
I was looking for the raise hand and it doesn't appear on this one. So that's why I was moving
Okay, or you
along.
can write in chat if you see that. Anyway, go ahead.
I'll contribute maybe in the next story.
Okay.
Okay. The next story, also published in 1961, not in a science fiction magazine, but in the Saturday Evening Post. And I think those of us who remember the Saturday Evening Post think, oh yeah, that's where it would go. It was originally entitled, what was it originally? My Name is Everyone. And of course, Who Am I This Time is a much better title. There's an hour-long, almost an hour-long TV production of, it was on American Playhouse. And when I was researching late last night, it's available. It's available on YouTube. And I will send a link in Friday. It was filmed in 1982, starring Christopher Walken and Susan Sarandon. And I knew about this. And as I reread the story, I always think of Christopher Walken and Susan Sarandon. And I think they would be absolutely perfect, except Christopher Walken from Astoria, Queens, as we all know, is very tall. And we learned that Harry is not tall. So another piece of factoid that I found is neither was Marlon Brando. And because Vonnegut describes Harry as somehow gaining 5 inches and 40 pounds when he turns into Stanley Kowalski, Marlon Brando was 5'9". So he was not himself. Marlon Brando turned into Stanley Kowalski through his acting skills. And I thought that was interesting because I always think of Stanley, of course, as being such a powerful character, as is embodied in the story, that I always thought Marlon Brando was much taller. But that illustrates what a fine actor can do. A fine actor can make himself or herself bigger and taller and more powerful. This also is a story about individuality, not as dreary and pessimistic as Harrison Bergeron, but it's also about love and kind of about love. I'd be curious to know whether you think that love is really the defining theme of the story. They both have trouble finding their true identities. So let's talk about the story. First, why do you think Harry is so shy?
Richard, go ahead.
Well, I think I was trying to look for that too. The only thing I can think of as an example is that they did mention that he was abandoned at birth on the steps of a church or something.
Right.
But I don't remember them connecting that to whatever his personality quirks were. I just love stories about crazy people. But this
Crazy?
was
Wait. Who's
What?
crazy in this story, Richard?
Well, that's what I was going to say. He's not really crazy. He's not really crazy. And I think, well, I don't want to go, well, I guess we all know what the ending is, but I loved at the ending when at various times during the story, people would suggest, well, maybe if he saw a psychiatrist, he would be okay. Why? And then at the very end of the story, when she says, well, you know, she didn't actually come out and say this, but the implication I thought was, well, if he's crazy, I'm going to love it. I'm going to enjoy every bit of it. And I just thought it was one of the sweetest stories I've ever read. So.
I'm anxious to hear other reactions. Can
Yeah,
we
we're
say,
gonna get them.
can we say
Go ahead, Beth.
quirky? Wait, can we say
Quirky.
quirky
Okay,
instead of
quirky.
crazy?
Okay, yeah, that's judgmental. Yeah, so quirky. Yeah.
Quirky, okay.
Okay.
Or eccentric, that's another nice one. Okay, Betsy, go ahead.
Well, as Richard just said, the character, the main character, was abandoned at youth, and he talks about growing up. He never could talk to people in high school. He couldn't, even at his job. He works in a corner. He doesn't feel comfortable, and only when he can live, it seems, in a kind of make-believe world that is defined for him, in acting specifically, that he can at least emote and act in a way that seems normal, if that's the right word that you want to use, is normal. But certainly he grew up in a very lonely, with a very lonely existence, and he doesn't and hasn't had the opportunity to have any other recourse than what he has now.
Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, I love the story. I love the characters, how they developed. But one thing is that I've heard that there are many actors who are actually very shy, and they have trouble talking to people outside of their acting role. They're not comfortable, but when they begin to act, they become different people. So I think this was an exaggerated version of this. I mean, quite exaggerated version of this, but it's something that I think I've heard before.
I want
Yes,
to
I-
add to that, if I may. Yeah, no, yes, you hear that a lot from actors, that they only become a person when they take on a role. It's like they don't see themselves as almost having any personality. That's from what I've read. I don't know.
No, I've known some actors and who have told me that that's why not many, but that's why some people choose acting as a profession, is because they feel kind of empty, and that by becoming an actor, that individual can find himself through being other people, but it gives their lives meaning that they might not have been able to develop on their own as their own person.
I also want to add that I think that there are a lot of people, talking about just regular non-actor people, who consider themselves shy, including many people that we would not consider shy. But, like, well, they're fine in Zoom in a class, for example, but they were always at a loss at a cocktail party and didn't know who to talk to, whatever. And everybody, I think, or most people have a shy moment, other than Donald Trump. But at any rate, so I think that part of what the story is talking about, of being uncomfortable who you are, and uncomfortable in public or with other people, unless you have a role to play. I always preferred, for example, to give my own parties than to go to a party, because when I gave a party, I was the host. I knew what to do. Hi, how are you doing? Have you tried the blah, blah, whatever. When you go to a party, you go like, oh my God, what do I say? So, but anyway, so I think a lot of people could probably relate to the story, whatever their occupation's been.
It seems to me that I'm reading more and more the word introvert. It seems to be a trending word that people are
Yes.
using a lot now. But let's talk about Helene, or Helene. I'm not sure how she pronounces it, and Google wouldn't help me with that one. Probably, do you know people whose name is Helene? Is it Helene or Helene?
I think it's Helene.
Helene, okay. Let's talk about her for a bit, because she's an interesting character in the sense that she's really not all that interesting. But what's her story?
Anybody remember? Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
First of all,
Wait,
they
before
did
you
say,
talk, Richard,
sorry.
Richard and I have reverted to roles that we played how long ago, Richard?
50 years
How
ago.
long ago has it been since you've been in high school
50
and I was your
50
teacher?
years ago.
A while is the answer.
Quite
Is
a while. Okay.
I keep trying to do that incomplete to make that up. So, first of all, it says at the very beginning, she's very pretty, apparently.
So is Susan Sarandon.
Yeah, so I don't know what that has to do with her personality, but I think she's just this regular woman with really no, she's got this sad life because she can never set down roots because she travels around with the phone company and she really doesn't expect much out of life. And then she's just knocked over when she meets this actor. And then when she
No, not
tries,
when she meets this actor.
no, not when she
meets
meets him, when she meets the
When she meets
character.
Stanley Kowalski, right?
Yes. And then when she realizes that he's nothing, but that he's so limited. In other words, she, unlike anybody else in his life, doesn't want to let him go, doesn't want to let him off the hook. And as a result, I think saves him and herself. It's a very sweet story. So
What about that scene where the director and the woman who was playing Blanche, I can't remember her name, when they tried to find out to get Helene motivated so that she will show some emotion during the audition, and there's that whole conversation about have you ever been in love? Can we
that was
talk
Harry's.
about?
That was Harry's boss, Lydia, I
Oh,
think.
thank you,
A
Lydia.
name I
Right,
remember. Yes.
but she
for the-
plays Blanche.
Yeah.
And how about that conversation? I found that just so telling and quite moving, actually. I'd be curious to hear your reactions. Rosie, were you
Let's,
going to comment on that?
Rosie,
Uh,
either that or something else. Whoops, sorry, I think I muted you by mistake, Rosie.
Hold on. There it
There
is.
you are.
Okay. So, no, I wasn't going to comment on that. I was just going to say that she turned out to be the smartest of all the people around him because she figured out that he wasn't going to change. And if she wanted to have a relationship, she had to figure out the angle. And she did. And at the end, you know, she sleeps with this one and that one and the other one, and she's got variety in her life and she's happy as a clam, you know. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was an
Did you
excellent
find it
ending.
believable? Did you find the ending believable?
No,
That this could actually happen?
I don't think so. Not in my experience of life. No,
Lucky you.
But- I don't
Uh,
think this could happen. No.
So Betsy, let's see, there you are, and then Joanne. Go ahead, Betsy.
Well, first of all, she grew up in a family that was always moving around. And so she didn't have a lot of stability. She would sit in class and maybe moon over some man that she looked at or student and said, oh, well, that would be so great if I could go. She fantasized a lot. She would go to a movie and sit in the movie theater afterwards, thinking about the actor that she had been enamored with. But in any event, I thought it was a wonderful description of her in the very beginning, as if she were in fact a robot, because she had no expressions really. And even when the director came to look at her, I mean, he was amazed that she was so beautiful, and yet she had no zest for life. She was just completely flat when she answered the questions. She did this. And when the woman what did we decide her name was?
Lydia.
When Lydia spoke to her and asked her about love, I think it was so heartbreaking in a way to see that she actually could break down and cry, to see that she has had no life, and that she was willing to try to make this work. I mean, not the relationship, but to try acting. But she was such a limited person in so many ways, as was Stanley.
Harry.
Harry, Stanley, whatever.
What's the difference? Yeah.
Sarah, Stanley, Romeo.
Abraham
Yes.
Lincoln.
Yeah.
All those guys.
But anyway, I felt for her. And did I think the ending was realistic? No, but it's okay. I liked the ending, and it didn't bother me. And she knew how to grab him, so she did.
Let's go to Joanne, and then I'd like to comment also. Go ahead, Joanne.
Yeah, it was very fairy tale. They all lived happily ever after. And we all like that kind of an ending, don't we? But I thought it was interesting when she was quizzing her about haven't you ever been in love, trying to get her to emote a little bit more. And she go back, was there a movie star or something that you fell in love with on screen? And isn't that ultimately what happens? I mean, she takes that distant love and then does the same thing with Harry in the different parts that they play, be it Romeo or Stanley Kowalski, whatever. Isn't that ultimately what happens? And she's content with that. She's very happy to fall in love with somebody different, depending on the role he's playing. Don't we all play roles? I mean, we play the teacher, we play the daughter, we play the mother. We all play roles. That's life.
And I'm betting we've all had crushes on movie stars.
That's another role we play. Exactly.
I still have my picture of Tab Hunter somewhere.
Oh no.
I think you should move on to Cary Grant. Okay. But I think, again, Vonnegut's obviously making a serious point too, as we all know, which is that in relationships, we do play roles. Obviously, this is an exaggerated, again, picture of it, but people do, sometimes you're the mother, sometimes you're the friend, sometimes you're the child, whatever, and it may be unconscious, but so this is a very, a little bit, not science fiction thing, but exaggerated way of talking about it. But there's a kernel of reality here, I think. Yeah.
Yes, it is fantasy in a sense, but when you think about it, this is something that actually could have happened. Really, there's a possibility that this could have played out in real life. I was too late last night to watch the hour-long movie, but you will all get it in email tomorrow. But if you go to YouTube and you click on Who Am I This Time, if you want to watch it tonight, you'll see it. And the little snippets that I did see, well, they certainly looked appropriate, except for Christopher Walken being too tall. But maybe that was after I saw a clip after he had transformed himself into Stanley Kowalski, and that's why he looked so tall. But apparently, it didn't deviate from the story. There is a film also of Harrison Bergeron, but when I was reading about it, I think this might have been a full-length movie, it said that it's loosely based on Vonnegut short stories. So I'm not sending you the clip, the link for that one.
Okay. Martha, you wanted to comment?
Only that I have read a few, of course, of Vonnegut, being a child in the 60s, and had to do that as a rule.
Right.
But I loved him. I mean, I remember when I read Cat's Cradle, I was like, oh, wow, all the way through. But I don't remember such romanticism in his books. This was a very romantic tale.
Yes.
And I don't really, do you?
Well, it's in a lot of his works, the characters are so alienated that there is not much room for romance. But as I said, I haven't read him in a while, but there is romance. And I saw a play of his, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater,
Right.
off Broadway several years ago. And there was romance in that. So I have to, now I'm going to go on a Vonnegut reading spree.
Right.
But yes,
I'll pull my books out of the bookcase.
But there is, yes, there is love and romance in some of his, especially in the longer pieces, in the novels. I don't think definitely not in Slaughterhouse-Five, if I recall. And so it goes. But in some of the other novels, yes, there definitely is. But this one is very romantic.
Very romantic.
So Karen, a question in chat about the first story. You said it's also on YouTube with the same title as the story, Harrison Bergeron name.
Yes, and I think it might be a full-length movie.
Okay.
Might be a full-length movie. So they've obviously loosely based. So it's obviously completely stretched out. I'm not quite sure how that would work. And when I was reading the Rotten Tomatoes scoring for it, it wasn't great. But out of curiosity, it would be interesting to see how they would have done it.
You know, the story reminded me, Harrison Bergeron, and I wonder if it's true for anybody else, of the movie Network, which is again about mass media and somebody gets killed on national television. I don't know. Anyway, that's what came to mind. It was a very dark view of the media, and a lot of people, I can't remember the year, but you know, a lot of people thought that also foreshadowed or kind of predicted what would be happening in the future. So, you know, media is a good target, I guess. Mesh, go ahead. You have to unmute.
I was going to say that the second Vonnegut story reminded me a little bit of the way that Paddy Chayefsky writes, even though Paddy Chayefsky is more realistic in his types of characters. But his message was always love will out. You know, love is the answer to everything. And just like that song Makes Someone Happy says, love is the answer. That's what happens in this story, that the actor finds somebody who he has the right chemistry with, and she finds someone that she has the right chemistry with. And if it's because she admires his role playing, and how many couples say sometimes they do play different roles, you know, you pretend to be the high school cheerleader and I'll be the
or a
football
teacher.
player. Yeah, to spice up their romance. But that's really what the story said to me, was even though the characters are quirky, you know, he needs a role to know what to say to somebody. It's the words that really matter. But the bottom line is that they had a chemistry with each other that neither one might have had with anybody else. They just happened to meet, and love is the answer. And by the way, Karen, one other example, when you were talking about a character, Marlon Brando, thinking he was taller, when A Death of a Salesman played on Broadway, Arthur Miller actually wrote that Willy Loman is a small person. And
Like Dustin Hoffman?
Yeah, well, that's the point. Lee J. Cobb ended up playing the original role of Willy Loman. And yet, when they finally did, years later, cast Dustin Hoffman, I feel he did a wonderful job. He was actually fulfilling Miller's original concept of the Willy Loman role, you know. So a good actor, like you say, can handle it no matter what his physical structure is, his stature, his physical stature is, but he can portray what needs to be portrayed in the character to seem believable.
I want to follow up and then ask Karen a question, because you know a lot about theater, but it seems surprising to me that when they cast roles, there are a lot of wonderful actors, male and female out there, that they don't follow what the playwright wants. If it's supposed to be somebody short, they couldn't have found somebody good who was short? You know?
Well, the Death of a Salesman, I saw the Dustin Hoffman one, and he was okay. But what I had a big problem with, and I think some critics did also, some real critics, not fake critics like me, is seeing John Malkovich as a football hero. That didn't work for me ever. I couldn't get beyond that, him as Biff. It just wasn't working. And I prefer the Brian Dennehy, Willy Loman to the Dustin Hoffman one. Just
so you don't think the physical size was necessarily that important?
No, I thought Dustin Hoffman was fine. But if you're going to get somebody to play a football player, then I think choosing John Malkovich might not have been the right choice.
A lot of padding. Okay, Rosie, come on in. Whoops, you have to unmute. Yep.
About size, you know, I always thought a lot of these actors were giants. You know, they were like 6'1", 2, 3. And then I find out they're 5'8", 5'9", and one of them was
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino for short, but Exodus. Paul
Newman.
Paul Newman. My heartthrob. Come on. And my sister met him at the Carnegie Hall, and he was like, she says, he's small. we both were expecting to see somebody really tall, but all the actors, and I've run into so many people on the streets here in New York that I expected to look up and I just look straight ahead, or down.
Remember Alan Ladd, where they would have him on huge,
Yes, yes.
Shoes
They
and
look
In
stuff.
the olden
gigantic.
days, they wore, a lot of them wore lifts in their shoes so
Right.
that they would look taller than they are. But on the stage or in community theater, as this is, apparently, if you're a really good actor, you can be tall.
That's
I
right.
mean, it was all in the way he presented himself. I love this story, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Chris Walken and Susan Sarandon, two of my favorite actors, perform, because I think that I can just see them. Well, I did see them for a fleeting moment last night before it got too late. I can just see them in those roles. So, and
Walken's a very talented dancer.
it doesn't sound as though they really padded it out, because it runs 53 minutes. And it was on one of those anthology, I don't know if many of you remember them, but it would be a weekly show where and they did it live most of the time. This apparently was later and was taped. And they would have a different dramatic production every week. And they had a lot of people on it who went on to become big stars in the movies. And this was their kind of their training ground where they would prove themselves. And that's where 12 Angry Men started. It started on one of those weekly anthologized TV shows, and then of course became a play, and then of course it became a movie. So I will be watching this, and you all can watch it either tonight if you Google, or tomorrow when you get your email.
I just want a quick thing about, and we know we need to wrap up. But at one time when I was going for a walk and I was right near Central Park, I looked next to me and it was Al Pacino. And that's when I was taller then than I am now. I was 5'3.5". And let me tell you, he was the same height. And it was like, what? Yeah. So anyway.
I have one suggestion. If I've enjoyed this, I hope you have. And if you would like to do more discussions of short stories, you all have my email address. And if you want to send me any short stories, I know Richard's going to send me the one that he keeps suggesting that I do. Which one is it, Richard? It's a Thurber story, right?
Oh, the catbird seat.
Catbird seat.
Yeah.
But if you'd like me to do another session and have specific stories that are your favorites, or that you want to get more insight in from other people, and please send it to me, and then maybe there'll be a possibility that we can do it again. So there'll be a shorter distance between when I was teaching in 1560 and now when I was teaching Chaucer. And that was in Middle English too. So, that was tricky. And we won't have to wait another 4,000 years.
So there's a note in chat from Rosie. Fabulous class. Clap, clap, clap. I think we can all join in and say that. And we know you need to run off to theater, Karen. So we thank you very, very much.
An ushering gig. But thank you all.
No,
Taking
what
Thank
time
you
does it
so
start?
much.